Content warning. Episodes of Gray Matter may contain themes and depictions of extreme mental illness, traumatic bodily harm, and death. If you aren't in the right headspace to engage with those depictions right now, maybe this episode should wait for another time. Otherwise, proceed with caution.
Hi, welcome to Gray Matter Video. Here, you matter. Is this your first time? Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, that dazed what the fuck kind of look on your face? It's fine, everybody does on their first visit. Let me give you the spiel. Where's that little paper? Oh, there, here we go. Gray Matter Video is not just an industry leader among video rental stores, it's also the largest video rental chain in the prime material multi-system. Every tape on Gray Matter's expansive shelves has been harvested from the organic material of a human brain, then bombarded by parasolar radiation and chemically burned in a process that we like to call tapifying. Once tapified, every video on our shelves is one of a kind and completely unique. A true story of impossible horror and existential madness streamlined into a narrative for capitalist consumption, and more importantly, ethically sourced from either our dimension or an adjacent one in our metadimensional stack. So look around, browse through some of our titles, and see if you can find something to scratch the tiniest folds of your joy-starved brain. That didn't help at all, did it? Well, you don't need to worry about any of that. That's just a corporate blurb. We got a special on Cronenbergian body horror, or if you buy a Kafkaesque Nightmarescape, we'll throw in a Freudian Eldritch horror for free. My recommendation? Well, this one just got here last week. Nobody's rented it yet. It's called Room to Grow In. It's a lovely little story about a young man learning that there's no place like home. Yeah, I thought you might like that. The tape's got to be back by Thursday, and I cannot emphasize enough how much you don't want to return this late. I mean, the fees are just, well, you know, it's one of a kind. These things can't exactly be mass-produced. Anyway, enjoy. Pop some popcorn, turn off the lights, snuggle up with your honey, and get ready for some weird shit.
Room to Grow In, written and directed by Jonathan Inbody and adapted from his short story, Gray Matter.
I was only 30 years old when I bought my first home, and none of the money I put down was even mine. The monthly mortgage payments were more than I could realistically afford, but the interest rate was competitive, and it was, allegedly, the right time to buy. The rundown house stood at the far end of a cul-de-sac, and although I was just moving in, I already felt like I belonged there. It was small and old, yes, but cozy, with an extra bedroom that I could use as an office and a newly remodeled bathroom. The only room I hadn't seen until the day of the move was the basement, and once I did, I understood that I was better off for having not seen it. It had been cleared out by the realtor and cleaned to the best of her ability, but the atmosphere was oppressive, and the light fixtures were faulty. The ceiling was slightly too low, and the piping that ran overhead was probably old enough to collect Social Security. As I carried the last of the boxes into the living room, my realtor prepared the final paper I needed to sign. She smiled and took out a pen, then handed me her clipboard and waited politely as I filled out the form.
Just print your name and sign on the line underneath it.
Sure. Hey, what's that other room for in the basement?
Room? There's just the one room in the basement.
No, well, I was putting some boxes down there and there's a door. A metal door? It's over in one of the corners?
I'm not sure, but it's probably just storage space. I don't remember seeing it on any of the blueprints. Do you want me to have someone check it out?
No, it's fine. I'll give it a look later.
All right, you're all set, Garth. How's it feel?
It feels good. Feels like home. After that, she left me to my unpacking. For the next few hours, my life was cardboard and bubble wrap. I finally gave up at sundown and ordered a pizza to celebrate the first night at my new place. I should have paid the movers to stay and help me unpack, I had decided. At least then, I would have had company for dinner. The pizza arrived within the hour, and I ate about half of it. Then realized I hadn't plugged in the fridge. I put the box on the kitchen counter and knelt down near the outlet. What was that sound? Where was it coming from? I crouched down, pressed my ear to the wall, and listened. It sounded like the quiet cry of some distant, dying animal, rising and lowering rhythmically in pitch and volume. But it wasn't coming from the wall. It was coming from underneath it. Were there mice in this house? I opened the basement door and listened at the top of the stairs, staring down into the total darkness. No sound came. Finally, I flipped the nearby switch and the downstairs light flickered on. Hello? Anyone down there? I started down the stairs into my new basement. The ceiling was too low, with spider webs that lined the pipes and ran across the full length of the cellar, the concrete floor illuminated by a pair of hanging light bulbs. I walked over to what I thought was below the kitchen and stopped, listening for this strange sound. Then, I turned my head back and forth to look into the still dark corners of the room, trying to estimate how far I could walk before hitting a wall. There it was. The door. The one the realtor didn't know about. The one that wasn't on any of the blueprints. It was easy to overlook, I supposed. A simple gray metal door with a padlock above where the handle should be. Near the bottom of the door was a small sliding panel, adorned with another rusty padlock. What kind of room was it? Some kind of dog kennel? What if there was an animal in there? Or, God forbid, a person? I grabbed my bolt cutters from the other side of the basement, then returned to the door and tried to get up the courage to open it. I crouched down and cut off the bottom padlock, then slid the small metal panel aside. I lowered my head and pushed it forward, straining to see into the darkness of the hidden room through the small panel. The room was empty, at least as far as I could tell. Hello? I got back to my feet and pressed the blades of the bolt cutter up to the padlock above the door handle, but something kept me from closing them. What if there was someone in there, waiting for me in the dark? After a second, I sighed and lowered the bolt cutters. I didn't have to do this tonight. I could explore the hidden room in the morning, with a baseball bat in hand. I slid the bottom panel closed, then went back upstairs and closed the basement door. I went to my bedroom, put the sheets on the bed, and plopped down onto the mattress. I was tired and achy, and more importantly, I had a book I'd been putting off reading. I fell asleep somewhere around page 20. I woke up early the next morning with a splitting headache. My right ear was ringing painfully, and as I sat up, I saw a small puddle of dried blood on my pillow from where it had been resting. I reached up and touched my ear, picking at a patchy scab as I climbed out of bed. I opened the bedroom door and stepped out into the hall, then recoiled as I stepped into something wet. A thin line of slick colloidal slime ran from my doorway down to the other end of the hall. It was the dull, grayish color of half-melted snow, and as I poked at it with a pencil, it seemed to have the consistency of jello. There were bits of dirt and curled hair suspended in the mucus-like gel, along with the jagged scraps of what I had to assume was bone. I followed the trail of gray mucus down the hall and into the kitchen, then stopped short. On the other side of the room, the basement door hung slightly open. A few hours later, my therapist and I sat in his office, deep in conversation. Dr. Pryor was a pudgy but well-put-together man with a neatly combed coif of salt and pepper hair. He tapped his pen on the open page of his notebook, then looked back up at me.
So what did you do after you found the basement door open?
What would you do? I went down, looked in the hidden room.
You cut the other lock off?
It was either that, or never feel safe sleeping in my house again. I thought feeling safe was the point of a house.
And what was inside?
It looked like some kind of animal habitat or something. There was like an inch of dirt spread across the concrete floor, and a water dish in the corner that looked like it hadn't been washed since, I don't know, the Reagan administration?
Was there an animal?
No, but the panel on the bottom of the door was open, so whatever was in there probably got out. Makes my skin crawl just thinking about it.
If I were you, Garth, I'd call animal control. Trust me, you don't want it dying in the walls.
There was more, but I couldn't tell him. How could I have explained it? When I had been down there, standing in the hidden room with the door open, I looked down and saw a strange pattern in the dirt. It was a spiral, carefully and intentionally drawn into the thin topsoil by some unseen hand. It had been started in one corner, then looped in large circles around the edge of the room and turned inward. Where the spiral ended, at what seemed to be the center of the hidden room, sat the skull of a small animal, yellowed and covered in dust. And as I turned to leave, I had seen something even stranger. There was an inscription carved into the back of the steel door, scratched into the metal over and over in shaky handwriting. "I am the crawler," it read, "and the earth is my hiding place." Dr. Pryor cleared his throat, shaking me from my daydream.
So, how's the new medication treating you?
It's been pretty good, actually. I haven't had a panic attack in a week or two, and this one doesn't make me feel like a zombie all the time.
Good, good. And the move hasn't agitated anything?
No, I'm just a regular person stressed, not crazy person stressed.
Anxiety doesn't make you crazy, Garth.
What about agoraphobia?
It's hard to be agoraphobic in a new house.
And yet, I manage.
I thought you said you were trying to get better about that. Getting out more, being more social.
I am. Or at least I'm trying to. I still don't get out much, but it's not... I can. I just don't really want to.
Is this about your father, then? His death?
I've been thinking about it a lot lately. Without what he left me, I'd still be living in some shitty apartment. I mean, the house is... it's great, but it doesn't feel like I earned it, you know? It just feels like I'm spending a dead man's money. And nobody else my age can even... I don't know. I'm afraid if I go outside, people will see me as I am, and... you know, I'm an open wound.
Grief can be complicated.
I'm alone now. More than I already was.
Being alone doesn't have to be a bad thing.
Whatever it was my father had, whatever made him do what he did, I feel like it's waiting for me. It's just brain chemistry, you know? I could be sick already. I wouldn't have any idea.
From what you've told me, your father was experiencing some pretty extreme paranoia and psychosis towards the end. I don't see any of that in you. But if it helps, that kind of fear is relatively normal for children who are raised by mentally ill parents. I'd be more worried if you weren't afraid of becoming him.
What if it's in me somewhere? The disease, nestled in between the folds of my brain or something. Just lurking.
Lurking. That's a fun word. A little dramatic, maybe.
Yeah, I guess. Do you hear that?
Hear what?
Oh, nothing. Sorry. I keep getting these headaches.
Have you been experiencing any confusion lately? Any erratic or impulsive behavior?
I don't think so. Why?
Well, if the headaches are recurring, there could be some kind of underlying neurological issue. I could schedule you for an MRI if you want. Rule some things out.
Like agoraphobia?
No, like bipolar disorder or certain types of epilepsy. Would that help you feel a little less worried about what's going on inside your head?
Yeah, I guess. Can't be anything too bad, right?
The brain is just another organ. It's not some empty space where thoughts go. Our minds are as physical as the rest of us. There is no shame in being sick.
It's easy to say when you're healthy.
How's Tuesday? I can drive you, if that would make it easier. Oh, you're not claustrophobic, are you?
Why? Two days later, I sat on a sliding table in a medical gown. The time had passed quickly, and although I had spent hours searching the house for more slime trails while I unpacked my things, none had appeared. There was no sign of whatever had been in the sealed room, and no way of finding out what had been kept in there in the first place. I sat up as the MRI technician came into the room and tried to push the thoughts to the back of my mind. I don't know why. I guess somewhere deep down I was afraid he'd be able to see them.
Are you comfortable? The machine's a little cramped, and once you're in, you can't move.
For how long?
Depends on if you move. It's going to be kind of boring, but it also might feel like someone slid you into a mechanical coffin. Just try not to think about it.
Thanks. I readjusted myself on the table, and he slid me into the thick, narrow tube of the MRI machine. I heard his footsteps walk away, then the door open and close, and after a few more seconds, I heard the machine hum to life. I stared up at the curved white top of the machine, only inches away from my face. There was something vaguely frightening about it, but more than anything, it felt right. In some strange way, I felt like I belonged here. It was snug, protective, as sleek and comfortable of a shell as I could find to hide in. I should get one of those weighted blankets, I thought. There was something almost eerily comforting about being so tightly confined, and I smiled as the rhythmic whirring began to put me to sleep. I woke up with a start a few minutes later as the table was pulled out of the machine. I felt something at the corner of my eye and raised a hand to wipe it, then pulled it back with a streak of clear plasma stuck to my fingertip. I stared at it for a moment. It wasn't quite sleep dust, not the way I was used to it, and the transparent gray color made me feel a little nauseous. It looked familiar.
Everything all right?
Yeah, how long was I out?
Not long. Thought I was going to have to wake you up, but you stayed pretty still.
So what's the prognosis? Is my brain turning to soup?
I don't know yet. It's loading now.
A pleasant chirp came from the technician's workstation. He walked over and sat down, and clicked a few times on the mouse, and suddenly stiffened. His eyes widened, and I watched as the color almost instantly drained from his face. What's wrong?
There's, I'm gonna send this out to a consultant, and we'll call you in a few days with the results. Okay?
Yeah, okay. Is everything all right?
Everything's fine. We'll call you.
As Dr. Pryor drove me home, I wondered what the technician had seen that had left him so frightened. I nervously tapped my foot and rubbed my hands together, staring out the window at the passing cars in an attempt to distract myself. My palms felt clammy and my fingers cold, and as I curled them, I swore I could feel my fingernails shift.
How are you feeling?
Anxious?
Are you still having those headaches?
Mm-hmm. Yesterday and the day before, the pain was at the back of my head. Now it feels like it's coming from right above my nose.
That's good. That means it's probably migraines or cluster headaches.
Why is that good?
Because that means it's not something else.
Like what? A brain tumor or something?
I'm not going to help you be anxious. Just wait for them to call you with the results. I'm sure you'll feel a lot better.
I really hope so. I spent the rest of the day unpacking, and I used it as an excuse to check the house one last time for whatever it was that had been living in the sealed room in the basement. The house felt smaller now, like familiarity had shrunk it. It had seemed so huge when I toured it, and before all the furniture, but with my things in it, it seemed almost cramped. No, not cramped. Comfortable. What was it the realtor had said? Room to grow in? That night, I laid in bed and tried to continue reading my book. I pulled my covers tightly around me, then nestled myself in even deeper to recreate the feeling I had in the MRI. It had felt good to be held, constricted and protected from the rest of the world. I was safe here, at home, in bed, wrapped snugly in my blankets. Except, I looked down and noticed my feet hanging off the edge of the bed. They had never done that before. I got up and walked to the bathroom, then switched the light on and stared at myself in the mirror. My face looked too thin and almost stretched, with strangely sallow cheeks and sunken eyes. Was I getting sick? I looked down at my hands. They were pale and clammy, even more than earlier, and I couldn't shake the feeling that my fingers had gotten thinner. They seemed longer, too. After a night of tossing and turning, I woke up the next morning with searing pain behind my eyes. They were bloodshot and bulging, constantly moist and bleary. The rest of my body was covered in a cold sweat, and the skin on my neck seemed to slough back and forth as I turned my head. I tried to read my book while I gathered energy to start the day, but the words were blurry now. What the hell was happening to me? I took an aspirin and plopped myself down in front of the TV with my blanket, then turned on a nature documentary and tried in vain to not feel like shit. As I watched South American ants crawl through the cramped tunnels in their hill, I felt almost jealous. The tightly packed dirt looked so welcoming, like they were wrapped in a blanket made of the earth itself. I thought of the thin layer of dirt covering the concrete floor in the hidden room of the basement, and of the spiral pattern drawn into it. The spiral wasn't a symbol I had considered before. It seemed to represent a never-ending journey inward, a steady curve into the Earth's warm embrace toward the center of all things, where I could be surrounded by layers of protection thick enough to keep the outside world from hurting me as I burrowed ever deeper. I was hungry. I got up and walked to the kitchen, still clutching my blanket tight to my shoulders. I looked into the mostly empty fridge, then took out the half-eaten pizza from a few days ago. When I opened the box and smelled the leftover pizza, I nearly gagged. It smelled terrible. It hadn't had the time to spoil, and the toppings showed no obvious signs of rot, but I was disgusted by it. I grabbed some takeout menus I had hung on the fridge with magnets and thumbed through them. Chinese food, Greek, none of it sounded appetizing. What was wrong with me? And why was I so goddamn hungry? The thing in the basement. I must have caught something, a parasite or some virus from whatever had been living down there. I walked over to the basement door and opened it, then remembered I still had the blanket draped over me. I pulled it off my shoulders and tossed it into the living room. I felt wrong, cold, almost naked without it, but I wrapped my arms around myself and walked down the stairs. Soon, I was at the steel door, pushing it open to look inside the hidden room. Nothing had changed inside, not really, but it felt different. Maybe I had just gotten used to it, like the rest of the house, but it didn't feel creepy anymore. It was almost cozy. I looked down at the spiral drawn in the dirt, then, as if by reflex, crouched down and put a finger down to trace it. The dirt felt so warm to the touch, like sliding a hand into a fur-lined glove. I glanced over at the small animal's skull at the center of the room as my finger ran absent-mindedly through the dirt. It looked sort of feline, and there were several spots where the bone appeared to have been pushed outward from the inside. It was warped slightly, with spots of varying thickness and misshapen cheekbones. Had the thing in the room been some kind of deformed pet? And where'd it gone? Had it crawled under the floor somewhere to die? Under the floor. I shivered with sudden pleasure at the thought of being tightly enclosed between wall and insulation. Nothing could hurt me there. What the fuck? I pulled my hand out of the dirt and stumbled backward. What was happening to me? Why was I thinking things like that? I turned to leave and ducked under the doorframe. The last time I was there, I hadn't needed to duck. I ran upstairs to the bathroom and threw up into the toilet. I began to shake, breathing in and out slowly as pain rippled from the back of my head to just behind my eyes. I quickly used my shirt collar to sop up some of the cold sweat from my forehead, then pulled myself to my feet and looked at myself in the mirror. My skin had lost some of its color, and I could see through it easily enough to trace every vein and muscle in my sinewy arms. My fingers looked like they'd grown again, and my fingerprints seemed to be stretched and misshapen. I ran my thumb over the underside of my pointer finger, then poked at my fingernail. It began to softly ache, and as I played with it, I realized it was coming loose. As I watched in silent horror, the nail slid off the top of my finger and fell to the floor. I shuddered with disgust and felt for my other fingernails. One by one, they each loosened and fell away from my hand. The skin underneath was sticky, slick, with some kind of organic lubrication that covered the exposed flesh and kept it from bleeding. I gagged and fell back into the wall, then began to cry in confused terror as I slid down to the floor. I reached up to wipe my eyes, then quickly pulled my head back. I could feel the gray substance oozing out, crawling over the edge of my cheekbones and rolling down my face like tears in slow motion. I had to get help, but looking like this, how could I even leave the house? Maybe I could call someone. Dr. Pryor, an ambulance, anyone who could help me. I pressed my fingers to my phone, and they flattened, bulging out like overfilled water balloons as I put pressure on them. After a long struggle, I managed to send Dr. Pryor a typo-ridden text, then dropped my phone to the floor and started to sob. I was so cold, despite the greasy sweat streaming down the sides of my face. I had to get back to my room. I needed to sleep. I needed to wrap myself in my covers and wait for help to arrive. I crawled out of the bathroom and down the hallway towards the bedroom, leaving a streak of gray mucus trailing underneath me with every clammy hand and footfall. As I pulled myself into bed, I felt a dull ache spread across the center of my jaw. My jaw felt like it was bending, cracking, and opening my mouth was the only way to relieve the pressure and end the pain. My tongue brushed past a tooth, and it popped out of place, then dropped out of my open mouth and onto my pillow. I brushed it off onto the carpeted floor and pulled the blankets tight around my body. Everything would be okay. Help would come. I just had to wait for them. I just had to sleep. I would be safe here, in my shell. Darkness crept in at the edges of my vision as I twisted and wriggled to get comfortable in my tightly wound blankets. I pulled them tighter and tighter, constricting my movements more and more as my thoughts returned to the world under the floor. I imagined myself down in the hidden room, slithering in infinite circles until the floor was worn away. Then I could squeeze and wriggle through the gaps in every wall, oozing around nails and pipes and through crests of insulation to find every warm nook and cranny hidden in my beautiful home. It felt so right to be so confined, so safe, crushed and flattened between walls of mental protection as I plunged downward into the pitch black of feverish sleep. Later, I woke up. It could have been minutes, hours, days. None of it meant anything to me anymore. I could hear someone knocking on my front door, feel it ripple up through the liquid walls, and then they started pounding on it more frantically when there wasn't an answer. I opened my mouth, then pushed away ropes of plasmatic slime tangled over it with my curling tongue. The few teeth that remained in my mouth had softened to almost nothing, and now hung as liquefied uvular feelers at the back of my palate. I spoke, but the voice that thrummed up through my throat and left my mouth didn't sound like mine anymore.
It's open.
Garth? Where are you? Are you all right?
Bedroom. Can't get up. Can't let anyone see me like this. Wait. Help me. I can't feel my legs.
Oh my God.
What is it?
Dr. Pryor reached a trembling hand over and turned on the bedroom light. I looked down at my body and almost vomited. The bed was barely underneath me now. I had grown in my sleep until my huddled form was crammed in the corner of the room, and my twisted limbs had coalesced around my bloated torso into a single bulbous body coated in the same gray slime that was seeping down from underneath me onto the bed and floor. Two clammy feelers reached out from underneath my chin as I thought about moving my hand and felt around my now flat face, then traced up the twisty stalks to where my bulging eyes now rested. As I looked at Dr. Pryor standing in the bedroom doorway, I realized my vision had changed too. It was more than 3D now, and as I moved my eye stalks back and forth, I could see every shape and color in a new, beautiful way. Dr. Pryor stared at me in horrified silence as I took his presence in. I could see everything, feel everything. I could feel his weight shift on the floor, sense the pulse of his heartbeat as it pounded through every bulging vein, taste every electrical spark bounce back and forth across the folds of his pulsing brain. Taste.
Don't move. Just stay still. I'm going to call for help.
He took a step backward, glancing back at the hall. I was so hungry now. I needed to eat so badly, and I finally knew what would satisfy me. My eye stalks curled menacingly around him, rising and lowering as I sized him up. He would sustain me. He would help me, just like he wanted. I slid my huge body forward and opened my mouth, feeling my throat bulge and expand as my jaw cracked and split into two toothy halves.
Jesus Christ!
I lunged forward and my massive form sloughed off the sagging bed like a torn-off scab, the countless finger feelers underneath me pulsing as they pulled me forward. I lurched, almost slithered, across the room and out the bedroom door, and the wooden frame cracked as my bulging body squeezed through. Dr. Pryor turned to run and slipped on the carpet, then fell and began to scramble backward with his arms raised to protect his face. My huge head lashed forward and I engulfed his head and shoulders, then began to swallow him as throat muscles I didn't know I had pulled him further down my gaping maw and towards my stomach. He thrashed and screamed, kicking his legs in a terrified frenzy as his head sank down through my gullet and dangled above the bubbling digestive juices waiting below. With one last squeezing muscle contraction, his head dipped down and splashed into the burning liquid. I could finally taste him. I tasted his skin as it melted and burned, the half-evaporated jelly of his eyes as they popped from the heat, and finally the mound of folded sweet meats he charitably called a brain as it slid down and out of his dissolving skull. Then his legs stopped kicking, and his body went limp. I pulled the rest of him into my mouth, then constricted my bulging throat to hold him in place as my jaw closed and cracked back into place. I felt satisfied, finally and truly, and as my eye stalks telescoped across the hall, my gaze fell on the doctor's briefcase. It was lying open on the floor with a broken latch, surrounded by scattered papers that had fallen out from inside. One of the feelers under my chin slowly uncurled and reached out for the papers, pushing sheets aside until I found what I was looking for. I raised the glossy photograph of my MRI results to one of my eye stalks and stared at it. The picture was a side profile of my brain. I could make out crooked ridges in the different sections, but a dark shape around the base of the brainstem quickly got my attention. It was bulging and strangely textured, with two long eye stalks that curled up into other sections of the brain, and a thick tail that extended down the spine like the back end of a slug. This was what had been in the hidden room. This was why my ear had been bleeding and my head had been pounding. It was inside of me now, gorging itself on fleshy chunks of brain matter and slowly changing the rest of me. We were like a living Russian nesting doll, it and I, twisting together like the ever-inward motion of the spiral. A life inside of an object, inside of a life. A snail growing to fit an unconventional shell. And so was I. I felt now what I would have previously called disgust, but the feeling no longer mattered. I pulled myself back down the hall and nestled into the corner of the bedroom, spitting up slime to glue myself back into place, then settled in and began to grow. As my body stretched and expanded and my half-viscous form pressed against the walls and ceiling, I felt like I was in the MRI again. My mouth, as different as it was now, twisted up into a smile. I grew and grew, and as the days became weeks, I could feel my back pushing up and breaking through the bedroom ceiling into the attic. The coil of slime-coated muscle I had once called my body plunged downward through the floor and spread out underneath me, pressed forward through walls, and filled every inch of each new room it reached. Soon, There was enough of me to comfortably fill the house-shaped shell that now protected me, and I pushed my bulging head out through the splintered front door and raised my eye stalks above the cul-de-sac. I'd need a bigger shell soon, an upgrade from my starter home to something with a little more square footage. The millions of tiny fingers underneath me broke through the foundations of the house and lifted me up from the basement, then began to curl forward and pulled me steadily down my street. It was true what they said. There's no place like home. It was my refuge, my protector, even if I would need to shed it soon, just as I would eventually need to shed the next one. What else could I do? I couldn't stop growing. To stop growing was to die, and I had no intention of following in my father's footsteps. I would keep feeding, keep expanding, keep bulging against the inside edges of bigger and bigger shells until the tectonic plates were my weighted blankets. The Earth's molten core would keep my twisted body warm, and then no one who wanted to hurt me could ever crack my shell. What was it that some shaking hand had scratched into the back of the steel door in the basement? I am the crawler, and the earth is my hiding place. They were right, and I was finally home.
Room to Grow In was written and directed by Jonathan Inbody and adapted from his short story Gray Matter. It was edited by Jeffrey Lavin, with music composed and performed by Samantha Hunt. Garth, the narrator, was played by Justin Pope. Dr. Pryor was played by Mark Bogumil. Andrea Inbody played the realtor, and Jonathan Inbody played the MRI technician. Gray Matter is a Word Search Media production. Any similarities to real people, places, or things is purely coincidental. Be kind. Rewind.